Hello Jawas! We've got a fully functional mask and remote control, so in this video we're just going to finish them. So let's take a look at the parts we're going to be using. We need something to protect the speaker, so this is a 2-inch speaker grill. This bit happens to come apart and the metal part is just the right size to kind of sit on top of this, so we'll tape that in place in a minute. We can get 4 of these for $10 on Amazon, so not wildly expensive. We also need covers for the eyes. Now, we've been using these 1.1-inch gumball machine balls. We use half for each eye, and we actually sand them to translucence. These fit the CRL perfectly, and they're cheap, with the downside that we haven't really seen them in quantities of less than 50, so build masks with a friend. I will note that these are kind of a pain to sand by hand, but we just haven't found a better way to get this kind of finish on them. Then we are going to cover the front of this mask with a lightweight fabric. We've got a piece of fabric that measures about 14 inches wide by 18 inches long, which is enough to cover the mask side to side and still have enough at the bottom to hide your neck. To help keep the bottom inside the hood, we've got some elastic to put around the bottom. This is about 21 inches of elastic and a couple of little pieces of velcro to fasten it together behind your neck. And of course, the fabric has to have holes for your Jawa eyes. Now, we've made a lot of masks here at Jawa Labs, and our eye spacing is pretty standard. So we actually have a little rig that helps us create holes using a propane torch. This is nice because positioning is consistent and the melted edges mean the fabric doesn't ravel. But if you don't have something like this, you can manage fine with scissors. So let's get started. All right, so I'm going to do the eyes first, nesting them inside these half cut out areas on the mask. But while I've got the hot glue gun out, I'm also going to put just a little bit around our LEDs to keep them into place a little bit better. And then for each eye, fill that with a bit of hot glue and make sure these are nicely nested in there so that the glue's got a grip. Now for the speaker grill, we're just going to tape that into place, and we'll be using the gaffers tape that we've used before, so this is really easy enough. And that's that. Now for the fabric, see, I've got the holes in this here. We really need to secure it around the eyes first. So I'm going to go back to the hot glue gun, but in this case, don't go crazy with the hot glue. This is definitely a less is more kind of situation. So give it a little dab, and then secure it down there. What we don't want is the fabric getting soaked with the hot glue and then it turns out kind of white there instead of black. So be careful not to burn your fingers, but really just enough to make sure that this stays with the eyes nicely exposed. Now, the next thing we need to do is to trim this fabric and secure it to the top. Now we are going to secure it with tape, as you can see here in a second. Note that I'm going to use gaffers tape again, but you might consider using black duct tape. Gaffers tape is great because it's not reflective, But in the end, all gaffers tape is designed to be temporary, so it may degrade with time. Duct tape may last longer, but where this is used around the edges of the mask, any extra shininess isn't really going to be visible. So as I said, I'm just going to go ahead with the duct tape here, with the gaffer's tape here. All right, that leaves the elastic and Velcro at the bottom. I'm not going to try to film sewing this, but this is the end result. So the Velcro, the elastic along the bottom, attach the Velcro so that it secures it, and basically our mask is complete. All right, so our last little bit of finishing is the glove. Our sound glove, essentially, or control glove. And what you got a lot of choices about this, but really what people typically do is mount this in some sort of a tight-fitting glove on your non-dominant hand, and then you'll wear an over glove on top of this to hide the electronics when you actually troop. Now, what we typically use here are compression gloves. These are available on Amazon for about $10. Often sold for arthritis, but they're short, fingerless gloves like this. And what we're going to end up doing is essentially sewing on these buttons onto each of our fingers, the insides, and then, figuring out a way to put the electronics on. The electronics you can either have in your palm or in the back, whichever you prefer. So you've got some choices when you do this. You really, you want to probably have your mask turned on and everything paired when you do this. You don't want to be tracing wires back to try to figure out which button goes to what, but instead you can just say, pick the button that you want. Maybe you want Utini to be this finger. That's not Utini. It's not Utini. And of course, it's the last one I tried. So this is the one you want to tack here. Work your way through the others. Maybe tack this down so you don't lose track. And we're going to assume that you've got everything, attached like that. Now the next question is, you don't want this dangling around. So you could do a couple things. You could make a little fabric pocket on here to either keep this in your palm or keep it around the back. Now, one easy thing that we have found is to actually use the other glove. This is my left-hand glove, non-dominant hand. If you turn the other glove inside out and then cut the fingers off a little shorter, and then pull it on top of this, it will essentially trap these wires while leaving the buttons exposed. And this is a pretty simple way of keeping all these wires constrained without going to a lot of sewing trouble to make a pocket. And that also lets you still access the electronics, because you do need to turn this on and off and occasionally change the battery. You just have to be really careful when you take this off. You pull it finger by finger, and you're not going to be pulling it from the back, because that kind of makes a mess. So that's how we're going to do this. And let me speed this up for a while we go. Okay, so I have spared you most of my sewing because, well, okay, that's not really my skill set, but I do have buttons sewn on, and I have trimmed the fingers short on the second glove, and now I can slip this on. And essentially, I have a control glove built nicely contained. So that is finishing up the mask. I hope you found these videos useful, and happy trooping.